What happens when the family that's supposed to love you becomes your biggest nightmare? And how does fate use your pain to prepare you for something much bigger? This is the story of Amaka, and it will break you and heal you at the same time. Amaka was just 9 when everything changed. Her real parents had died in a fire back in Nigeria. One moment, she was laughing in the small kitchen with her mother. The next moment, there was smoke, flames, and loud screams. When the fire went quiet, Amaka had no one left. She stayed in an orphanage until a couple from America came to adopt her. Their name was Adeyemi. They smiled a lot and wore clean clothes. They told the workers they wanted to give her a better life in the United States. Amaka held tightly to the small photo of her mother and followed them. When she arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina, everything looked big and shiny. The house had stairs, soft chairs, and walls that smelled like fresh paint. Mr. and Mrs. Adeyemi gave her a room of her own. They even took her shopping and bought her school clothes. For a short time, Amaka felt lucky. They took family pictures. Smiling. Standing close. Like one happy family. At church, they held her hand. At school, they told the teachers she was their daughter. People praised them. Such kind people, they said. To adopt a child from Africa. But at home, things were different. Amaka was not allowed to eat at the dining table. Her food was placed in a plastic plate on the floor, near the kitchen door. If she made noise, they scolded her. They told her not to call them mom or dad. They said she was not their real child. She was just someone they helped. The worst was their daughter, Lola. Lola was 13 and mean. She laughed at Amaka's accent. She called her names and once poured water on her bed. One winter night, Lola locked her outside for hours. Amaka stood in the cold, barefoot, her lips shaking, her hands numb. No one came to open the door. Still, Amaka said nothing. She cried at night and hugged her old photo tightly. She told herself she had no choice. She had no one else. One afternoon, while cleaning Mr. Adeyemi's study, she saw a small wooden drawer under the table. It looked different from the others. Old. Worn out. But locked. Amaka didn't mean to touch it. But her eyes kept looking at it. Her fingers reached out and pulled the handle gently. It didn't open. But something had shifted inside. Something fell. When no one was home the next day, Amaka came back with a hairpin she had found in Lola's room. She knelt beside the drawer. Her hands shook as she tried to open it. She heard a click. Inside was a bunch of papers. Some looked like bills. Some were letters. But then, her heart stopped. There was a brown envelope. On the front was a name, Nene Obesai. That was her mother's name. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a folded letter, written in the same neat handwriting her mother used when writing her birthday cards. The words were soft and full of love. But why was this letter here? Why did the Adeyemis have something from her mother? Amaka's chest felt heavy. Her hands went cold. She knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Amaka turned 14, but no one remembered. There was no happy birthday. No gift. No cake. Not even a smile. So, she decided to make her own cake. She had seen Mrs. Adeyemi bake many times. Flour, sugar, eggs, a little vanilla. She mixed carefully, holding back tears as she worked. The cake was small. It was not perfect. But to Amaka, it was everything. She placed it on the table. Lit one candle. Closed her eyes. She didn't wish for toys. Or clothes. She just wished someone would love her. Then, she heard footsteps. Lola walked in, her eyes full of hate. She looked at the cake, laughed loudly, and then she grabbed it and threw it on the floor. The cake broke. The plate shattered. And Amaka's heart cracked again. The noise brought Mr. Adeyemi rushing in. But instead of scolding Lola, he turned to Amaka. His voice was cold. He shouted that Amaka had disrespected the family by using their things without permission. He didn't let her speak. He didn't let her cry. He dragged her down the stairs. "Open the basement door," she begged. He didn't listen. The door slammed shut behind her. Then silence. The basement was dark and cold. It smelled of dust and old things. Amaka sat on the floor, hugging herself. Her thin sweater didn't help. Her stomach growled, but there was no food. Only fear. Hours passed. Then something moved. A rat, maybe? Amaka crawled deeper into the basement, searching for warmth. Behind the water heater, she found an old rusted trunk. The kind with a heavy lock that creaked when touched. It looked forgotten, covered in spiderwebs and dust. She opened it. Inside, she found burnt papers, the edges black and curled. But some were still readable. Her hands moved slowly, brushing through the ashes. Then she found them, photos. Photos of her real parents. Her real home. And then, one photo stopped her breath. It was a picture of her mother and father standing in front of a house. And behind them, smiling, were Mr. and Mrs. Adeyemi. Amaka froze. Why were they there? Her heart raced. Her mind spun. Were they friends? Or was it something worse? She kept digging through the trunk and found a folded piece of paper inside a plastic cover. It looked like a legal document. It was a will. It had her parents' names on it. It said that a piece of land in Houston, Texas, had been left behind for Amaka Obesai, their daughter. Land? In Houston? No one had told her this. Not the orphanage. Not the Adeyemis. Why? The candlelight from a broken flashlight flickered as her hands trembled. She looked again at the photo, the smiling Adeyemis behind her parents. And she asked herself the one question that would never leave her mind again. Did my parents really die in that fire? Or was it something else? Amaka didn't say a word about the trunk. Not to anyone. She memorized the address on the will. Then, she copied it onto a tiny piece of paper and hid it inside the sole of her school's shoe. Every night, she would take it out and read the name again, downtown Houston, Texas. She didn't know much about land. But she knew it belonged to her family. She began to watch the Adeyemis differently. She watched how they smiled in public but whispered cold things at home. She listened closely, hoping they would slip and say something. But they never did. At school, Amaka stopped smiling. She stopped raising her hand in class. She barely ate her lunch. But one person noticed. Her school counselor, Mrs. Grant. Mrs. Grant wore glasses and smelled like lemon candy. She always asked Amaka if she was okay. At first, Amaka just nodded. But slowly, she began to talk, just a little. Enough for Mrs. Grant to feel something wasn't right. Then one day, the school announced a trip. A visit to Atlanta, Georgia. Amaka's heart skipped. She knew this was her chance. She asked Mrs. Grant if she could sit beside her on the bus. Mrs. Grant smiled and said yes. When they reached Atlanta, the students visited a museum and a park. But Amaka kept looking at a tall glass building across the street. It had a sign that read, Hamilton and Parker Law Group. She turned to Mrs. Grant and whispered something into her ear. Mrs. Grant looked confused, then surprised. But she nodded. Together, they crossed the road and walked into the building. The marble floor was cold. The air smelled like strong coffee and leather chairs. Amaka clutched her small bag. Inside were the burned documents, the photo, and the will. A lawyer with gray hair and kind eyes looked through the papers slowly. Very slowly. Then he looked up. And sighed. He said the name on the will had come up years ago. There had been a house fire in Nigeria. 2 people had died. A land dispute followed. But no one could find the heir, so everything was frozen. No one claimed the property. So it just sat there. Amaka asked if the land was still there. The lawyer nodded. But then he said something else. The land was now worth millions of dollars. A tech company wanted to build there, Offices. Towers. Something big. But they couldn't buy it until the rightful owner signed it over. Amaka's hands shook. The lawyer asked how she got the papers. She said nothing. Just pointed at her chest and mouthed the words, "It's mine." The lawyer looked at her closely. Then, he said something that made her heart race faster. If the Adeyemis found out she knew the truth, they would destroy every piece of evidence she had. She had to act fast. Or lose everything. The courtroom was cold and quiet. Amaka sat at the front with Mrs. Grant beside her. Her hands were tight in her lap. Her heart beat so fast, it felt like it would burst. Mr. and Mrs. Adeyemi walked in, dressed in fine clothes. Their faces were calm. But their eyes were sharp. They told the judge that Amaka was lying. They said she was confused. They said she was mentally unstable. They held up papers with fake doctor notes. They said Amaka had imagined the will. That she made up stories for attention. That she was trying to steal from them. The judge listened. But so did the people. Then, Mrs. Grant stood up. She spoke slowly, clearly. She told the court how she had seen Amaka suffer. How she had seen the bruises, the fear, the silence. Then came the big moment. A screen turned on. And on it appeared the face of an old woman from Nigeria. She smiled when she saw Amaka. She said she had lived next door to Amaka's family in Nigeria. She remembered the fire. She remembered the screams. And she remembered one thing clearly. Before the fire, she had seen Mr. and Mrs. Adeyemi visiting Amaka's parents often. The courtroom went quiet. Then, the lawyer brought out a small bag. Inside was a strand of hair, taken from the trunk in the basement. It was sent for DNA testing. The results came in. It matched. Amaka was the biological daughter of Nena and Chuka Obeisai. The courtroom gasped. The judge banged the gavel. He declared Amaka the rightful heir to the land in Houston, Texas. He charged the Adeyemis with fraud and emotional abuse. They stood frozen. Faces pale. Words gone. Then, something unexpected happened. Lola stood up from the crowd. Her face was red. Her eyes filled with tears. She cried out that she had heard her parents talking years ago. She had heard them planning to change adoption papers. She had been scared. Too scared to speak. But now, she said, she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She looked at Amaka. Then she ran out of the courtroom. Amaka didn't move. She couldn't. Too many years of pain had led to this one moment. But inside her heart, something soft began to grow. Something that felt a little like freedom. Amaka turned 18. She left Charlotte without looking back. The land in Houston was now hers. But instead of selling it, she did something different. Something no one expected. She gave part of it to a nonprofit group that built homes for orphans, especially immigrant children who had no one. Just like she once had no one. They worked together. Day and night. Amaka helped draw plans. She helped paint walls. She held small children in her arms and whispered to them, "You matter." One day, a news reporter visited the shelter. Then another. Then more. Her story spread, online, on TV, in papers. From basement to breakthrough. The headlines read. People wanted to know how a quiet girl who was once forgotten became a voice for the voiceless. And then, the letter came. It was from Washington, D.C. It had a gold stamp at the top. Amaka was invited to speak at the White House Youth Empowerment Summit. She sat in front of her mirror in a hotel room the night before the event. In her hands was a dress. It was soft. Long royal blue with bright yellow patterns. The same Ankara design her mother used to wear back in Nigeria. She wore it with pride. When she stepped onto the red carpet the next morning, cameras flashed. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She walked tall. At the podium, everything went quiet. Behind her, a large screen lit up. Photos flickered across it like memories in the sky. One showed her crying in the basement. One showed her sitting alone at school. Another showed her holding a paintbrush beside a shelter wall. Then one more, her, smiling in front of the White House. Amaka stood still. No words. Just her eyes looking into the camera. Her heart beating for every girl who had ever been broken. And across the screen, the words slowly appeared. Family isn't who raises you. It's who lifts you. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope. Don't forget to subscribe for more African folktales that awaken the soul. Like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications.